Both of them died on the 7th of October of 2019. Both of them had been strangled. And both of them, before they were forever silenced.
There's enough data to support that his brain is not functioning like a normal, healthy individual.
The defense recently got approval for a CT scan of Wilson's brain based on a previous evaluation by a doctor.
They called him Wade Wilson. Not the comic book anti-hero, but a real man with a face that told its own story. Every inch of his skin was a canvas. Tattoos sprawling from his neck down, symbols of a life lived on the edge. Some said he wore them like armor, others said they were warning signs. And behind those tattoos was something darker. A broken brain, scarred from childhood head injuries, a mind warped by years of drugs, rage, and rejection. Adopted at birth, Wade never seemed to find where he fit. Teachers saw the outbursts, cops saw the arrests, prison saw him over and over again. And then one October night in Florida, the world saw who he really was. Not a lost son, but a predator. 2 women ended up dead, strangled, beaten, one run over until her body gave out. And when the police came knocking, Wade didn't cry or deny. He bragged. He told his own father over the phone, "I'm a killer." Here's the part that still chills people. In court, he carried himself like he owned the room. Calm, unmoved, as if the testimony of grieving families, the autopsy photos, the words heinous and cruel were just background noise. Even when the jury came back, death on both counts, he barely flinched. This isn't a story about a monster hiding in the shadows. It's about a man who turned his own life into a warning and a justice system forced to decide, do you kill the killer? And what happens when the face looking back at you from death row is covered in ink and shows no trace of regret? On the night of March 24, 2019, the city of Cape Coral, Florida, moved at its usual pace. People closed their businesses, cars lined the roads, and families settled in for the night. Yet somewhere in that calm, a storm was brewing, one that no one saw coming. A storm carried inside a man named Wade Wilson. Wade wasn't a stranger to violence. He was the type of man whose presence unsettled people, even when he wasn't speaking. Tattoos, scars, and a dark stare that made you second-guess his intentions. Those who knew him described him as reckless, unpredictable, someone who lived in chaos and dragged others into it. But no one could have predicted how far that darkness would go. Picture this. A humid Florida morning. Downtown Fort Myers, still half asleep. A woman stumbles into a spa lobby, dress ripped, hair tangled, eyes darting around like a trapped animal. Her voice is low, cracked. "He tried to drag me into a car." She doesn't even have to say his name. Outside, the man she's running from is already gone, slipping into the streets in a stolen black Nissan Versa. His name is Wade Wilson. At the time, most people thought Wade was just another small-time crook with too many tattoos and too much anger. A troublemaker, sure, but nothing more. What they didn't know was that 2 women were already dead, 2 families already broken, and the hunt for him had quietly begun. Here's the part that makes your stomach twist. Wade wasn't in a blind rage. He wasn't drunk, stumbling into bad decisions. He knew exactly what he was doing. Later, when his father begged him to explain himself, Wade didn't cry. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He just said it flat, like ordering breakfast. "I'm a killer." No shame, no hesitation, just fact. While police scrambled across Lee County, Wade was still out there driving from house to house, knocking on doors of people who barely knew him, borrowing phones, making strange calls, trying to scrape together cash for a bus ticket out of town. And every now and then he bragged. He told people he'd done something bad. Nobody wanted to believe him. They thought he was bluffing, flexing his ego. But Wade wasn't bluffing. This isn't a story about a comic book villain. This is about a man who turned ordinary Florida streets into his hunting ground. And about the people, police, friends, even his own father, who refused to let him slip into the crowd and vanish. But if you really want to understand Wade Wilson, you have to go back a little further. Because before the headlines, before the mugshot on the evening news, there was Melissa Montes. Melissa was a young woman with a bright smile and a brand new Dodge Hellcat she was proud of. That car was her badge of success, fast, loud, impossible to ignore. She'd been dating Wade for about 6 months. Friends told her to be careful. They said he had a record, a temper, a way of twisting every story until you felt like the crazy one. But Melissa wanted to believe she was different, that she'd be the one to tame him. That's what she told herself. On October 6, 2019, they pull up to the Buddha Bar in Fort Myers. Neon lights buzzing, cheap beer on tap, reggaeton shaking the floor. Just another Sunday night. They laugh, they drink, they look like any other couple. But under the surface, something's boiling. At some point, Wade leans in, says he wants to leave. Go to somebody's house. Melissa says no, maybe she's tired, maybe she senses the edge in his voice. They argue. He storms out, muttering, heading for the car. She stays inside, scrolling her phone, trying not to make a scene. But when she finally walks outside, her heart drops. The Hellcat is gone. Wade took it, left her stranded in the parking lot with nothing but her phone and a gut feeling she should have trusted from the start. What Melissa didn't know, what no one knew that night, was that this wasn't just a stolen car. This was the beginning of Wade's spiral. A breakup would become a battery would become a double murder, and soon Cape Coral would learn his name the hard way. Before Wade Wilson's name hit the headlines, before the murders that shocked Cape Coral, he was already walking a path carved out by violence. His story doesn't begin in 2019. It begins decades earlier, in a childhood where anger seemed to bloom like a weed, unchecked and choking everything around it. Wade grew up in Florida, bouncing between family members and trouble. Teachers remembered him as restless, the kind of kid who couldn't sit still, who fought at recess and exploded over small things. Authority didn't just frustrate him, it lit a fuse. He didn't follow rules, he challenged them. Every time someone told him no, Wade made it a battle. By his teenage years, fights weren't just on playgrounds, they were in the streets. Arrest records began stacking up. Theft, drugs, battery. He became a regular in the juvenile system, in and out of holding cells that felt more familiar than classrooms. For some kids, an arrest is a wake-up call. For Wade, it was an initiation. Prison only made it worse. Every time he went in, he came out harder. Tattoos multiplied across his skin. Skulls, slogans, emblems of the life he was choosing. And with every fresh release, there were new charges waiting. Domestic violence, stolen cars, aggravated assault. It was a cycle that didn't break because Wade didn't want it to. People who crossed his path said the same thing. Wade had two faces. One was smooth, even charming. He could buy you a drink, joke about nothing, talk you into trusting him. The other was violent, unpredictable, and terrifying. You never knew which side you were going to get. He could flip in an instant, smiling one moment, swinging the next. There were warnings. Girlfriends left him, friends cut ties, judges handed down probation with stern lectures. But Wade never changed. Violence wasn't something that came and went. It was stitched into him. By his late 20s, he wasn't just another guy with a record. He was a career criminal, known by police in Lee County, whispered about in neighborhoods where his name carried weight. And deep down, Wade seemed to know where it was all heading. He once told a friend, half laughing, half serious, "I'm going to die in prison anyway." It wasn't just talk. Wade lived like a man who didn't see a future beyond bars. Reckless, destructive, always pressing the limits. Each arrest was another step closer to the line most people never cross, the line between criminal and killer. By 2019, Wade Wilson had crossed that line, and Florida was about to learn just how dangerous a life of unchecked violence could become. Diane Ruiz wasn't supposed to end up in Wade Wilson's orbit. She wasn't reckless, she wasn't chasing danger. She was just a 43-year-old woman trying to piece her life together, a mother and a friend known for her soft heart. If you asked people about Diane, they'd say the same thing. She trusted too easily. She believed in second chances, even for people who didn't deserve them. That's how Wade slipped in. The two met through mutual friends, the kind of casual connection that doesn't set off alarms right away. Diane had heard whispers about his past, his temper, his record, but she brushed them off. Everyone makes mistakes, right? People change. She wanted to believe Wade could be one of those people. To Wade, Diane was an opportunity. She had a car, a home, a life that felt steady in ways his never did. For a man like him, that kind of stability was a resource to drain, not something to cherish. He could smile, act tender, play the part of someone who cared, and Diane, being who she was, let him close. Their relationship was short, a matter of weeks, maybe months, depending on who you ask. But in that time, the cracks showed fast. Wade was possessive, moody, quick to anger. Little arguments turned sharp. Friends noticed Diane pulling back, making excuses for him, defending choices she shouldn't have had to defend. One night, Diane confided to someone close that Wade scared her sometimes, the way he looked at her, the way he'd go silent, jaw tight, fists clenching. But she didn't walk away. That's the part that haunts people now, how easy it is to mistake fear for something temporary, how quickly "it's fine" becomes the last words someone says about a relationship that was never safe. By late March 2019, Wade's world was already unraveling. He'd stolen cars, assaulted women, left chaos trailing behind him. Diane didn't know the full picture. She only knew the man who sat across from her, asking for another chance. On March 24th, she crossed paths with him for the last time. Witnesses would later place her walking near Southeast 47th Terrace in Cape Coral, just blocks from her home. Wade was nearby, and whatever hope Diane still carried, that he might be different, that he might change, ended on that street. Hours later, she was gone. Diane Ruiz became more than a trusting woman who loved too deeply. She became the first name tied to Wade Wilson's killing spree. The first life stolen in a storm that would leave Florida shaken and 2 families broken beyond repair. Here's the part that still chills me. Diane Ruiz wasn't supposed to die that night. She was just walking, less than a mile from her home, when Wade Wilson spotted her. March 24th, 2019, Cape Coral. The sun was dipping low, the kind of Florida evening where the heat lingers even after dark. Neighbors saw Diane out near Southeast 47th Terrace. Nothing unusual, she often walked that way. But Wade was nearby, circling in a stolen car. Now here's what gets me. Diane actually knew Wade. They weren't strangers passing in the night. They'd been close enough for her to trust him, even when she shouldn't have. And on that street, that trust turned fatal. Witnesses later recalled seeing a car pull up, hearing raised voices. Some thought it was just another couple fighting. You know how it is. People argue in public all the time. You don't think you're watching the start of a murder. But inside that car, things escalated fast. Wade snapped. He dragged Diane inside, forced her down, and what happened next was brutal. The details from investigators paint a horrific picture. Diane fought back, scratches, bruises, signs of resistance, but Wade was bigger, stronger, and fueled by that mix of rage and control he'd lived on his whole life. At some point, he strangled her. The life drained out of her in silence while outside the world kept moving like nothing had happened. And here's the part that tells you everything about Wade Wilson. After killing Diane, he didn't panic. He didn't hide. He drove around with her body in the car. That's not rage. That's calculation. That's someone who doesn't see a woman, a mother, a life, just an object he could discard. Eventually, he dumped her, left her like she was nothing. Police would later find Diane's body in a wooded area off Pine Island Road. By then, Wade was already on the move, already planning his next stop, his next victim. But he slipped up. Witnesses remembered the car, remembered seeing Diane arguing before she vanished. Neighbors gave police enough to start piecing things together. And Wade? He couldn't resist bragging. He made calls from borrowed phones, dropping hints that he'd done something bad. Those words would come back to bury him. So when you hear the name Diane Ruiz, don't just think victim. Think of a woman who trusted too much, who fought back in her final moments, who left behind family and friends still aching for answers. And remember Wade Wilson, not just for what he did, but for how he did it. Calm. Cold. Like murder was just another choice in a night full of bad ones. If Diane Ruiz's death showed Wade Wilson's capacity for violence, the second murder proved it wasn't a one-time snap. It was a pattern, a choice. Hours after Diane's body was left in the woods, Wade was already on the move. He drove to Cape Coral, to a quiet neighborhood where another woman lived, Christine Melton. Now here's the thing about Christine. She wasn't connected to Wade the way Diane was. They weren't dating. They weren't close. She was 35 years old, friendly, known for her kindness, and she lived alone. Wade had been introduced to her through friends, one of those loose connections you don't think twice about. But Christine made the mistake of letting him inside. Here's what gets me. Investigators say Wade wasn't frantic when he walked through her door. He wasn't desperate. He was calm, almost casual, like he knew exactly what he was there to do. He spent time with Christine, sat in her home, acted normal. Then at some point the mask slipped. The details of what happened next are disturbing. Wade turned on her. He strangled Christine, just like Diane. The similarities were impossible to ignore. No gun, no knife, just his hands. It was personal, intimate, the kind of killing where you're face to face with your victim until the very end. Neighbors later told police they heard noises that night, thuds, muffled sounds, but nobody called it in. By morning, Christine was dead. Wade left her body in her home, just walked out, took her car keys, and slipped back into the streets like nothing happened. And here's the part that shows you how reckless he'd become. Wade bragged about it. In the days that followed, he told people he'd done something bad, even described strangling women. One friend was so disturbed that he went to the police. It wasn't guilt talking. It was ego. He wanted people to know. By now, detectives were connecting the dots. 2 women strangled within hours of each other. Both connected to Wade Wilson. Both killed in ways that showed control, not chaos. This wasn't a man who snapped. This was a predator. Christine Melton's death cemented the truth. Wade wasn't just violent, he was hunting. And once you start looking at his movements that weekend, the stolen cars, the phone calls, the way he drifted from one woman's life to the next, you realize it wasn't random, it was escalation. Diane was the beginning. Christine was the confirmation. And the city of Cape Coral, once quiet, once safe, now had a serial killer moving through its neighborhoods. So here's what gets me. After the murders, Wade Wilson didn't disappear into the night. He left breadcrumbs, and his own father became one of the biggest clues. Police in Lee County were scrambling. 2 women dead in the span of hours, almost no obvious motive. No ransom, no clear tie, just terror and questions. They began combing the scenes for anything. Fibers, fingerprints, DNA, surveillance footage, stolen cars. They pulled cameras from streets, parking lots, home security. Every angle mattered. At the Melton home, they found signs of strangulation, a broken door, personal items missing, and the victim's car gone. At the Ruiz crime scene, there was blood, tire tracks, and debris. A destroyed body, discarded. But those were the gory parts. What detectives needed were trails. They traced the stolen Jeep Cherokee to several locations, checked gas stations, traffic cameras. They followed phone records. They looked at every call made in those hours. That's when they saw something chilling. Around the same time the murders would have occurred, there were multiple calls made by someone to a man named Stephen Testaseca, Wade's biological father. Fourth copy Testaseca later testified that Wade called him repeatedly after the killings. He confessed. He said things like, "There were 2 people gone, they would not be back. I'm a killer." He described how he met Christine Melton at a bar, took her home, choked her. Then he forced Diane Ruiz into the car, strangled her, and realizing she was still breathing, ran her over, until she looked like spaghetti, his father recalled hearing. Suddenly, police weren't chasing phantoms. They had a name and a man who admitted everything to his own father. Testaseca, terrified and conflicted, called law enforcement. He gave Wade's location, or at least helped them zero in, rather than turning a blind eye. Meanwhile, investigators dove into Wade's past. They pulled his criminal record, burglary, grand theft, firearm offenses, battery, and saw a pattern. A man who had been in and out of the system. These prior arrests gave them known aliases, previous addresses and fingerprints to match. The forensics team matched DNA and trace evidence. Blood in the stolen vehicle, fibers in the Melton house and connections between crime scenes. Investigators also reviewed his phone pings, location data, timestamps. Every guilty move left something behind. By October 8th, the net had closed. Law enforcement surrounded a house in Cape Coral where Wade was hiding. A SWAT team moved in. He was found inside, wet from showering, trying to wash away blood, wrapped in clothes he stole, hiding like a man cornered. He surrendered without a fight. That's how the police hunt ended, not with a dramatic chase or shootout, but with a man caught by the echoes of his own confession and the digital traces he left behind. In that moment, Wade Wilson stopped being an urban legend. He became a name, a criminal, a man whose fate would be decided in a courtroom. Here's the part where things shift. When Wade Wilson stops being just a shadow in the headlines and becomes a man boxed in by evidence. After confessing in phone calls to his biological father, Stephen Testaseca, Wade had given police everything they needed to close in. Testaseca and his wife relayed Wade's admissions, descriptions of the strangling, even the running over of Diane Ruiz, to law enforcement. That confession was a lead too heavy to ignore. On October 8, 2019, just a day after the murders, law enforcement located Wade in a Cape Coral home. In Christine Melton, strangled in her bed after meeting Wade at a bar, her car stolen. Then Diane Ruiz, lured into the car under false pretenses, beaten, strangled and run over repeatedly. They played his own phone calls. They showed DNA matches, blood evidence, fibers, tire track correlations. They argued the murders were heinous, atrocious, cruel, and that the second killing was cold, calculated, deliberate. The defense didn't deny that Wade did it. Instead, they painted him as a broken man, drug-addled, brain-damaged, impulsive. They brought in neurologists and mental health experts who testified about his head injuries, brain scans, structural damage, emotional dysregulation. They claimed methamphetamine used that day rendered him unable to form premeditated intent. One of the most powerful witnesses, his own father. Testaseca testified about those calls where Wade described the killings, the strangulation, the violence, the dispassionate way he spoke of two lives ended. His testimony hit the courtroom like a gut punch. The confession wasn't hearsay. It came from the killer's own mouth. Witnesses like Melissa Montanez, who described his erratic behavior, spoke about earlier assaults. Stephanie Sailors corroborated his presence at the bar and in Melton's home before her death. Doctors in court broke down autopsy reports, ligature marks, petechiae in the eyes, bruising on the necks, all consistent with manual strangulation. On June 12, 2024, after hearing everything, the jury found Wade Wilson guilty on all counts: first-degree murder, theft, burglary, battery. Just days later, the penalty phase began. Prosecutors pushed for death for both murders. The defense clung to mitigating evidence. The jury's decision came fast. They recommended death in both cases, 9-3 for Melton, 10-2 for Ruiz, satisfying Florida's lowered threshold, 8 votes, under laws changed in 2023. On August 27, 2024, Judge Nicholas Thompson officially imposed 2 death sentences, citing the aggravating nature of the crimes and deeming the mitigating factors insufficient. In court, Wade sat motionless. No tears, no pleas for mercy. The families listened, some wept, others stayed stoic. The judge looked at him and said, "The brutality, the cruelty, the violation of 2 lives tipped the balance beyond redemption. That's the moment Wade Wilson's fate was sealed. 2 women dead. A courtroom stripped bare, and the man who looked like the average tattooed stranger was now a condemned killer, waiting behind bars for the law's final word. June 12, 2024. The courtroom brimmed with silence, tension thick in the air. The jury, after days of testimony, graphic evidence, and harrowing details, returned a verdict. Guilty on all counts. First-degree murder. 2 women dead because of him. The question then, life or death? The defense rose one last time, painting the portrait of a broken man. Concussions, brain scans, mental health, drug use. They asked the judge and jury to recognize the cracks in Wade's mind to favor mercy. His adoptive parents' voices trembled as a letter was read aloud. "Wade was once our child, full of laughter. The system failed him. We love him still." But the state refused to soften. Prosecutors called the crimes not just murders, but heinous, atrocious, and cruel. A murder in a woman's own bed. A second where he strangled, then ran her over. They said this was more than violence. It was predation. They urged the jury that Wilson's actions disproved impulsivity. There was calculation, control, and absence of remorse. When the verdict was in, it was final. The jury recommended death, not unanimously, but enough under the new Florida law. For Melton's murder, 9 jurors. For Ruiz's, 10. The judge nodded and accepted the sentence. 2 death sentences. 1 for each life he stole. As the gavel struck, the courtroom cracked open in grief. Family members sobbed, braced one another. Diane's father whispered names he could no longer say in person. Christine's cousin cried for years stolen. Wade sat silent, unmoved, unreadable. The judge declared that the weight of aggravation far outweighed any mitigating factor. The man they once called a son had become something irreparable. Once the sentence landed, everything changed. But life didn't end. A new chapter began. The wait. Wade was moved to death row. Cells made of steel, minimal contact, limited light, endless hours of solitude. Guards noted infractions, refusals, defiance, cold disregard for rules. He was a catacomb of quiet rage. His name became a lightning rod. Across Florida, debates ignited over jury thresholds. Could a man be sentenced to death without a unanimous jury? Some saw this as justice catching up. Others saw a system loosening its cords. The arguments over mental illness, addiction, brain injury, and accountability echoed beside newspapers, talk shows, law journals. Letters flooded in, some outraged, some remorseful, some claiming devotion. His adoptive parents' pleas resurfaced. They spoke of a boy who once laughed. They accused institutions of silence. They begged for mercy but understood the family's pain. Meanwhile, families of Christine and Diane carried wounds open. Every hearing, every date ticked loud. Some said they'd attend the execution, not for vengeance, but to say goodbye, to confront the end. A final face-to-face with closure. Each day on death row was the same. Lights, food slot, legal visits, solitary hours. Time slowed. His tattoos, faces, symbols, swastika mark beneath his eye, became part of his mythos. He asked permission to cover them at trial, so jurors wouldn't be influenced by what he looked like. Yet those marks stayed part of who he was, visible remnants of a choice. Long after headlines fade, the legacy of Wade Wilson endures, in law, in hearts, in memory. First, the law. Florida's decision to reduce the jury threshold for death sentences wavered under scrutiny. Critics asked, if a life can end based on 8 votes, where's margin for doubt? Wilson was among the first high-profile cases under this change. His case bubbled in legal textbooks as a watershed moment. Second, mental health. His story forced a cold spotlight on how society treats trauma. Head injuries, substance abuse, early warning signs, they asked whether those systems failed. People wondered if somewhere Wade could have changed with help. Yet the horror he unleashed argued otherwise. Third, the families. Diane's sons will live without a mother. Christine's dreams, her laughter, froze in photos. They demanded more than justice. They demanded remembrance. They rallied memorials, spoke at hearings, held pain in public. They pressed the world not to forget. Fourth, the discussions of recompense. Does executing a killer heal, or does it sharpen the blade of grief? Some said Wilson's death sentence was necessary. Others said it was a final, violent echo, society taking the same tool the killer used. The debate raged, is death penalty justice or vengeance? Finally, the human cost. 2 women, full lives, full hope erased. Families haunted by what could have been, a city forced to reflect. How does someone like Wade Wilson live among us unnoticed until he's unmasked? How many red flags went ignored? Wade Wilson lived by violence. He was born Anthony, adopted into a church-going family but never quite found home. His brain was battered, his heart was broken, his choices were deadly. He sat in court, face inked with symbols, a man who confessed to his father like ordering coffee. "I'm a killer." He did not cry, did not beg. He accepted the sentence like he accepted the darkness he carried. His story ends with the judge's gavel and 2 death sentences. But endings are illusions. The lives vanished will forever echo. The laws changed will forever carry his shadow. The debate on how we punish, how we heal, how we prevent, his name is stitched into it. Wade Wilson's legacy is fear. Fear that one among us may carry hidden violence, fear that broken systems let it fester, fear that the worst in humanity sometimes walks among us in tattooed skin, silent until the final breath. That's where we draw the line. That's where we watch. That's the cost we all pay when we witness death, judgment, and the echoes that survive.